The slave trade is abolished in 1807, but it's still legal to own a slave until slavery itself is abolished in 1834. But to soften the blow for the slave owners, not the slaves themselves, there's an enforced period of apprenticeship where slaves remain working for their masters for no money. Essentially, they're still slaves until 1838, and they're only emancipated on the 1st of August 1838. And incidentally, the slave owners get given £20 million of compensation. That's £20 million in the 19th century, not the modern equivalent. The modern equivalent is into the billions. It's such a big number, I always forget it. So it's quite staggering, and no compensation paid whatsoever to the slaves. This bit here is moving into the 19th century, because of course, as we said before, British slavery is abolished, but we're still getting cheap cotton from America. And so slavery is still impacting on this part of the world because of the cotton industry. Do you know about Alexandra Park? You're not from Oldham, are you? Do you know why Alexandra Park was built?
Because of the cotton famine.
Yeah,
I've actually been to the park, but I don't know anything about the history of it, or why it's not so named or anything.
Well, as this lady said, it was because of the cotton famine when the North blockaded the South to starve the South of its economic resources, basically. The cotton wasn't coming through to the northwest, so the mills were quiet, people were being laid off, people were going hungry, they didn't have any money, and then they didn't have any work. So the corporation actually set up a sort of like public works project to build the park, to give work to people who had been working in the mills. And these are just souvenirs relating to Alexandra Park. They're not related directly to slavery, but they're about that park, whose origins go back to this period of history. And then again, Uncle Tom's Cabin. Very similar to this image we were looking at before. Just like this image, this is what got people emotionally involved in the abolitionist movement. They cried when Uncle Tom died, and this is what got them involved.
And did people actually, I'm talking about ordinary people, did they actually not know a lot of what was going on, or did everybody just turn a blind eye because they wanted the sugar, the tobacco and the cotton?
There's no single answer to that.
Is everybody guilty of that sort of thing, really?
A lot of people knew and turned a blind eye, certainly. I think more people knew about it than we possibly realise. Certainly, if you look at the debates in the 1832 election, slavery in Oldham, for example, was a really hot issue in the 1832 election, and there are records of public meetings with several hundred people going to them to debate the abolition of slavery. And if you read Butterworth's diary, which is available through local studies, pages and pages of evidence about how slaves were treated. And so certainly there was information going around about this. As I mentioned before, the black American slaves who were travelling around to packed out meetings told them about what was happening in America. And there are mill songs. I believe the Tinkers sang a couple of mill songs relating to slavery, but I don't know if that happened.
I only caught the last 20 minutes.
Right. Well, they were certainly going to, because there are mill songs that show that they knew that the cotton was coming from America, and they knew that it was picked by slaves, and there was quite a lot of sort of sympathy as well, sort of understanding of shared suffering of working people in a kind of bigger economic system. There was some understanding of that, and there is evidence of that through songs and through other records that actually people working in the mills were aware of it. And there was a lot of support for the North, which was the anti-slavery side in the American Civil War in this part of the country. And we haven't got one here, but if you look on this banner, there's this barrel which came from the people in the north of America, was sent to people in Rochdale and Oldham and several other places in the northwest to thank them for their support for the North and their opposition to slavery. And it was full of salt pork and flour and things which were sent as food for people. And it actually says on it, recognising the starving people of Lancashire who understood that their suffering was a direct result of the slave-owning classes of the South. So there's actually a remarkable amount of knowledge and understanding about this. So to say that people didn't know about it and couldn't be held responsible really is simply not true.
What I'm curious about is the different layers of society, because the people at the bottom were working in the mills, although presumably their conditions, or I don't know, but their conditions were generally better than the slaves. They were still on a par with them. So their understanding and their mentality and their emotions to do with the slave trade wouldn't be the same as the people who are middle class and the people who are upper class.
Right.
You know, there's a different kind of thinking about it all. And I wondered how much they would know at the bottom end, because they didn't have the media that we have today.
But they had songs, they had oral culture, which took that place, didn't they? So it's through things like the songs. It's more that the songs are evidence to us that somebody at that level knew. Do you see what I mean? And so there's increasing evidence among historians over the last sort of few years to find that there was more knowledge than you might have expected lower down. Of course, the other issue of people higher up is that they were perfectly happy to be concerned about slaves in America, but they turned a blind eye to people working in appalling conditions in the factories here. Yes. So there's that side of it as well.
Paradox, really.
Yeah, exactly. But it was a paradox that was understood at a time. Again, if you read newspaper reports from the 1832 election, that paradox is talked about. So it's very. Just the last bit at the bottom is just to look at how empire follows slavery. We abolished slavery in 1838. And it's really after that the empire really grows. And one of the kind of things that fuels the growth of empire is this belief that the British are somehow morally superior to the other nations in the world because they abolished slavery, and somehow abolishing slavery gives them a right to take their civilizing influence into other parts of the world. And the two things very clearly follow each other. There's a historical reason for why the British can say we're superior, and they can point directly to their altruism in abolishing slavery. So it's a kind of irony that's often forgotten that it actually enables the growth of empire rather than limits it.
But then there was a superiority before the abolition, that they were actually superior to the slaves with the trade, and then they became superior again because they abolished it.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, it's pathetic, really, isn't it?